Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Sean Courtney, and I'm the Communications Officer here at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Today's webinar, Introduction to SharePoint, will be presented by Matt Walton, Senior IT Consultant at InfoExchange. Just a bit of housekeeping for today. If you have a question, please type it in the question box on your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll aim to pause about halfway through the presentation to answer any questions you might have. And lastly, don't forget that a copy of the presentation will be sent to you all in the coming days, so you can review it at any time. That's about all from me, so I'd now like to hand it over to Matt. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Sean, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is an introduction to SharePoint. Now, today we'll be hoping to give you a sense about how SharePoint, or if SharePoint, is suitable for your organisation and what for, and how you could use it. So personally, I've been using SharePoint for over 10 years in a variety of different organisations and have found it to be a great tool, but also a tool that's not necessarily suitable for everything or for everyone. So today I'm hoping to give you a sense of how it can work and a couple of things to look out for. So with my work at InfoExchange, I have been, and we, the team, have been working with over 100 not-for-profits, and we've implemented a range of different SharePoint solutions. Most of those nowadays are on Office 365, which is SharePoint Online. So as you can see there with the types of organisations, it can work for both small organisations of, we've got a couple of organisations who don't even have any staff. They're just volunteer-led organisations, to large nationwide organisations with thousands of staff. So it is a really flexible tool that can work for everyone. So today's agenda, I was hoping to talk through SharePoint and how it fits in with Office 365 and really what is SharePoint Online, so go into a bit of detail there. Talk about how some other not-for-profits are using it and give you some practical examples of how you could use it in your organisation. And then we'll go into some of the functions of SharePoint. So as I said, SharePoint is a very diverse tool and can be used for a lot of different things. So we'll touch on some of those today, or try and touch on as many as we can. There are also some limitations and challenges. So as I said, not suitable for everyone or everything. So I'll highlight those just to help you with your decision making. Also, there's a lot of other applications that either work with SharePoint or are alternatives to SharePoint, so I'll touch on a few of those. And then I'll spend the last part of the session talking about things to think about if you're planning on implementing it and what stages you should go through. So it's really around what are the important things to remember. And we'll finish off with some top tips and resources. So I hope that will meet everyone's needs today. Look, today we have decided not to do a live demo in terms of actually showing you some of the functionality, because I expect for many of you that will be the next step. I think what was important today is for me to talk through some of the things for you to think about and assess whether SharePoint is right for you. So I think that's almost a more important step than us wowing you with some cool functions and features that may get you excited without thinking about the key things. So the other thing that I'll mention as part of this, and as we go, while InfoExchange is a Microsoft partner, this webinar is an independent webinar. So luckily I can be open and honest and tell you the good and the bad. All right. As Sean said, I will stop for questions about halfway through and as well at the end. I also have my email address on the slide, so you're welcome to email me if there's anything that's sort of specific to your organisation that you would like to discuss a bit further. So why have I got a slide that talks about Office 365 when you've logged into a SharePoint webinar, is one of the questions you may be asking. So many not-for-profits, most not-for-profits, are eligible through Microsoft for donated E1 licenses with Office 365. So as you can see there, Office 365 gives you a range of features and functions. So email system basically, calendars, contacts, Yammer, a range of applications. And obviously the most important one there for today's webinar is SharePoint. So basically what I'm saying is you can actually get SharePoint free as part of Office 365. Now this is SharePoint Online. It's not SharePoint that you install on a server. So many of you will have heard about SharePoint that you install on a server. Some of you may already have it. You know, there are old versions. I used to use SharePoint 2003 back in the day, 2007, 2010. The current version is SharePoint 2016. You can actually buy those licenses through Office, through Connecting Up, I believe, if you for some reason need a local server hosting your SharePoint. However, we're seeing that 90% of organisations, particularly those that are starting on SharePoint new, SharePoint Online is more than enough and is very suitable. So the other good point about this slide is there are a lot of other things that Office 365 can do. And in some cases, and we'll touch on this later, some of these things are actually better at some things than SharePoint is. So we will talk a bit later about what's the best application for each function that you have as an organisation. The other great thing about Office 365 is it's continually growing and changing. So currently Office 365 has been free to not-for-profits for over a year, and there is a really rapid development cycle with Microsoft, and we're seeing new things being launched every day. So those of you who have SharePoint, there was actually a new SharePoint library look and feel that was launched recently that many of you are starting to see. Also there on the roadmap, there's the new sync tool that a lot of our clients are looking forward to that is coming later in the year. There's other upgrades to SharePoint around functionality and integration. There are other products that sit alongside SharePoint or use SharePoint, like Office 365 Groups, which we'll touch on later. Other things like Flow, which is a workflow tool, Power Apps, which is basically a form, an online form, an online app that you can use on mobile devices to complete information, as well as mobile apps. There was actually a SharePoint iPhone app recently launched that is quite good, and some more form functionality. So there is, while we're talking today about what's available now, there is gradually more and more features and functions available in Office 365 and SharePoint that are, again, most of these are free and part of your E1 plan. So feel free to click on that link once you get these slides sent out to you that Sean will do after this, and have a look at where things are at. All right, so that's the roadmap for Office 365. So coming back to the real point of this webinar is, what is SharePoint Online? And so this is essentially Microsoft's definition. So really it's a cloud-based service that Microsoft hosts in their data centres, in Sydney and Melbourne by the way, for a range of different businesses. So it is configurable, and SharePoint Online, it's hosted so you don't need anything on your server, so you don't need a SharePoint server. And essentially it's primarily for employees, so primarily it's an internal communication tool, but you can share documents and information with external people as well, potentially. So, so that's really the high-level definition of SharePoint Online. So, what do people use it for, and what could you use it for? So, the next slide really is, here are some examples of uses from other not-for-profits that we're seeing or that we've implemented for other not-for-profits. So as you can see, it's a really flexible tool that can be used for a whole heap of different things. Now again, you don't have to use it for all of these, and possibly it's not suitable for you to use for all of these. As you can see, some of these things you may have a dedicated tool for. So you may, some people do some little lead requests and those sort of things in SharePoint, so forms and internal processes. However, other organisations actually have HR systems, which is perfectly fine and more appropriate for many cases. So these are some examples. So internal processes and forms, and we'll come back to each of these later. Database and lists. So again, it's storing information for your organisation that all your staff can access. You can manage projects with it. So personally, I actually use SharePoint project management tools instead of Microsoft Project a lot of the time. So you can do task lists and Gantt charts and those sort of things to manage projects. You can collaborate on documents and work on them together and edit them at the same time. You can share information externally. For some organisations, you can replace your file server. I said some, so not everyone will be able to do this. You can have version history and change tracking. You can have offline access. You can have mobile apps, and you can have a knowledge base. So many organisations use it as an intranet where they can have that knowledge base so that their organisations go to get work instructions and how-to documents. Discussion boards, and really storing things on the cloud. So again, many of you used to have sort of backups and storing information on your local server that then you'd have to take off-site. So it's replacing some need for some backups, not all need. And again, it's hosted in Australia so that, and Microsoft put some really strong security controls around that. So we'll get into a bit more detail around really some of those uses in a minute. But how we see it, there are 4 core uses for SharePoint. So 4 categories essentially of things that organisations typically use SharePoint for. So many organisations really use it as that high-level intranet, sort of a landing page and a top-level site that all staff can go to download and access information. So it's that hub of a knowledge base, of news, of tools, of information that particularly large organisations that are geographically spread are really getting the value out of this intranet. So to put it in perspective, many large corporate organisations, National Australia Bank and those type of organisations, use SharePoint for their intranet. Now the next thing it does is team sites. So at the next level down where you've got really operational people that are wanting to access documents, tasks, calendars, tools and information, you can actually create those team sites or project sites or collaboration sites for distinct groups within your organisation. And you can set permissions on each of those sites so that you can have the right people accessing the right information. The other thing it does is administration process. So things like, as I mentioned before, forms and storing data in lists and managing those tools with workflow. So one of the examples I'll give later is a new starter administration form. So when a new staff member starts an info exchange, we fill out a form and then people across the organisation get notified to action things like give them an alarm code, give them a uniform, give them a computer, give them a pass card to enter the building, those type of things. So you can use these to help your administration reduce that paperwork and manual process. Now one of the most popular things that SharePoint does and is used for is document management. So again, many, particularly small organisations are trying to use SharePoint to replace the old file servers. Again, not suitable for everyone, but it does have some great functionality that we'll talk about later around security and tracking versions and all those sort of things. So it has traditionally been a good document management system. So let's go into each of these in a little bit more detail. So one of the key things from an intranet perspective is you can actually make SharePoint look, feel, do whatever you want it to do. Now, we typically recommend that you stick as close to out-of-the-box SharePoint as you possibly can. We work with many organisations that have wanted more and have got developers and have done graphic design and sort of gone a bit custom in terms of how they use SharePoint. Now, yes, you can definitely do that. There are lots of SharePoint developers and apps out there, but typically we recommend for most not-for-profits a standard out-of-the-box SharePoint is usually enough for an intranet. But as you see there, these three do look and feel quite different. They're three totally different intranets on that page there, and they all do different things. So really the whole point of an intranet is information sharing. So some of the examples is that knowledge base or wiki that work instructions. So we have some organisations who have it as a manual. So this is how to be a staff member in our organisation and how to do the day-to-day things that you need to do as a staff member. So that knowledge base where staff can go in, download or read the work instructions and then sort of do that, as opposed to having them in paper folders sitting in your offices that if a manager wants to update the document, you then have to go around and print off and make sure everyone's working off the right version. Whereas on here, anyone can edit it at any time and the staff that log in always have the latest version. Policies and procedures are another very common one. So once the board or the management have approved a policy or procedure, pop it up on your intranet and share that with your staff to make sure they're all reading it and have all acknowledged that, that policy. Image galleries, templates, news and blogs is another common one. So actually using the CEO, actually sharing information, using this as the primary internal communication platform for your organisation. And look, this is really where SharePoint has its strength, is around that intranet and sharing information. Sites and collaboration. So the next real features and functions is, as I said, it's more at that operational level, and each site can have a different purpose and have a different permissions. So you see one example here is a project management site. So this is a site for a particular project, and you've got documents, you've got tasks, you've got news, you've got links, you've got a range of things for this site. Now, many organisations we work with, they essentially set up a site for each department in their organisation or each location and use this for their collaboration and storage of information. So it's that team information. So discussions, you can work on documents together, work on tenders, work on grant proposals, work on policies, whatever you need to work on. And that's sharing of calendars, tasks and information. So these sites can be used for a range of purposes and a range of stakeholders. So see in this next one, we've actually got a board site there. So one of the key things that many organisations are using it for is, let's give our board, our volunteer board, a site where they can store their minutes and agendas and meeting calendars and task lists and whatever else they want to do, discussions about policy and those sort of things. You can have a portal, and I use this myself. When I work on projects with clients, I set up a project portal where the clients can log in and see a project task list and see where things are at and who's assigned what task and get notified when things get completed. see on the other one there, you can store documents to do with that project. You can store news feeds and links and whatever else you need to store. So again, very customizable. Each site can be different. So you have a totally different site for your board than you would for your project team or your department or location. So quite a flexible tool. Administration is an interesting one. So again, it's some of the more advanced functionality that you can configure that you can really essentially use this for anything. So really what SharePoint is, it's a blank canvas that you can create a list for any piece of information. And you can put in the fields that you want to collect. So if it's, I gave the example before about a new starter form, we put in fields on this form of whatever information we want to collect so that when someone in our organisation employs a new person, they fill out all of that information, and then there's workflows attached to that to send out tasks and notifications to the people who actually have to do the work, who have to go out and get that pass card, for example. Now, when that pass card has been delivered, then the person who gets that actually goes into the form, says, yes, this task is complete, here's the pass card. It's on the desk. So then the key people in the organisation can actually see where each of these tasks are at. So you can use that function for anything. We have people that use it for issues logs or maintenance requests, or I've used it before for a large national organisation for incident reporting. Now again, there are other incident reporting systems out there. Many of you will have OHS systems, and that's fine. But for those of you who don't have these third-party systems for maintenance or incidents or IT issues, this could be a quick and easy way to at least get something documented and something basic for your organisation to at least start collecting that information in an online forum. So this is accessible from any PC, any tablet, any mobile device, and staff can complete this wherever they are. So it's really quite a flexible tool. So here's some more examples there. So you can see in the top left corner, there's actually the notification and the database of where each form is up to, so the status of which ones are approved, which ones are awaiting approval, and then you've got all the columns across. The image in the middle there is an IT request, that's where people log in, fill out the new item, and put in all their information about their IT issue, and then the IT manager actually receives a notification and then can action that. And the bottom right was that administration, one of those administration forms that I mentioned. All right, so coming back to the, one of the key things that everyone is interested in for SharePoint is the document management libraries. Now, like anything else in SharePoint, it is customizable and configurable, and you can set up the libraries however you want. So many organisations essentially want to replicate what was on their file server, same folder structures, same permissions, or very open permissions, same file names, all those sort of things, bring them across into a library, and in some cases that works. The other thing that you can do, and I think you can probably see in this image here, these documents, there's no folders in this document library, and they're actually categorized by what we call metadata. So it's categorizing documents by multiple things. So you notice there the how to order a non-IT equipment, it's categorized by a function, it's categorized by document type, and it's got approvals and owners associated with that. So we can filter or view or categorize these documents in a range of different ways. So it makes it easier to search, and it makes it easier to display just certain types of information. So you can do document management in a range of different ways. It's quite sophisticated. So you can also have approval workflows on those as well. So some organisations, as we said, that with basic document management requirements and not, not too many documents, can replace their file server. And those organisations that are ready for change and ready to try a new way of document management, it can work quite well for them. Other organisations that really love a file server and are resistant to change, maybe a SharePoint document library isn't the best solution. So we'll flesh this out a little bit further. So one of the things that a lot of organisations are loving in SharePoint is what's called version control and version history. So essentially every document in SharePoint, in a SharePoint library, has the functionality to go into the document, and you see the little menu there that has version history in it, and basically click on that and you can actually see who's edited each document and when they've edited it and how, and what changes they've made. So that does allay the fears of many people who are worried about people going in and changing their documents and all of that. Really, if you have the ability to at any time go back and check all the old versions, and if you need to, you can restore an old version. So if someone's gone in and made a change to your document that you don't like, you can always just go in and restore the old version. So it has that capacity to do version control. Likewise, from a security perspective, you can set permissions, and you should set permissions, on all of your document libraries and sites, and even down to the document level if you really need to, but ideally you would set your permissions at a site level, and then actually say, okay, this is the board site, only the board members need access, and maybe the EA and CEO, and no other staff need access. So you have peace of mind that the board site is secure and it's only accessible to those who have permissions. Okay, so co-authoring. Co-authoring is another cool tool and function that now is available in Office 365 and in your Office applications. So you see here there's a Word document, and I use this a lot, both in Word Online and in Word on Office 2016, which I use. And what that basically does is I can work on a grant application or a new policy, or I can work in a document. To be honest, these slides, when I did these slides, I had a colleague that went in and made a couple of little changes as well. So we worked on this together, and I could actually see what changes they were making live as they were making them. And afterwards I could see which ones what comments they were making, or what changes they were making directly to the document. So it saved that whole process that many organisations used to do, where you email around different versions of different documents and say, oh, this one's Matt's copy, this one's Mark's copy, this one's Steph's copy, this one's... And then someone has to try and merge them all at the end. Whereas here, the document lives in one spot, and everyone just comes into that one spot to edit the documents. So again, you can manage permissions about who can edit, and you can sort of all collaborate on the document together. So again, this is changing the way you work and improving your efficiency and improving communication and collaboration across your organisation, regardless of where these people are. They could be sitting next to each other, or they could be in different countries. So co-authoring is a really good feature of SharePoint. The other thing that SharePoint does, it has the capacity for you to have offline copies of documents. So really what it's doing, and I use this when I go on planes or on the train on the way home. Basically, I have some of my libraries synced so that I can, when I'm offline, work on the offline copies, and then when I plug back into the internet or get Wi-Fi, then it synchronizes back up. And any changes that are made, they sync and try and resolve themselves, but in some cases you need to actively manage that. So that's why there's a bit of a use with caution. And we do often make sure people are fully aware of how this can impact them, because you need to, if there are those sync issues, you do need to proactively manage them. If you don't manage them and you've got 100 different people using the same library with files that don't synchronize, then you can come into some issues. Now, Microsoft are actually working on a new tool that will help improve that, and apparently it's going to be released later this year as part of the roadmap. So that's going to make some people's lives a bit easier and help improve that offline syncing capability. So this helps explain that a little bit more. So as we said, we've got SharePoint Online. OneDrive for Business is in a similar scenario. So typically how we differentiate the two is we say OneDrive for Business is something that everyone gets as part of Office 365, and every individual user gets 1 terabyte of storage as part of their OneDrive. So for me, I have my working, some basic working documents, anything to do with my professional development, any casual things I've just downloaded and want to read on the train or something like that. So I store that in my OneDrive. Whereas anything I want to share with my team or anything that my organisation wants to keep on an ongoing basis and be accessible to everyone, I store in SharePoint. So in theory, if I leave Info Exchange, they can delete my OneDrive, delete my account, and anything I've stored in OneDrive, no one will access anymore if they delete my account. Now you can obviously archive that, but in theory, they could delete my OneDrive, because anything that I've needed to store as part of the organisation, as part of my work, and to share with my team is in SharePoint. So that's a differentiator between the two. And if I want to take them offline, I just sync. Either I click the sync button for my OneDrive, or I click the sync button to my SharePoint sites. And then I have them in my Windows Explorer stored offline so that I can access when the internet is down. And for those of you who have poor internet or travel a lot, that can be a good risk management sort of exercise to say, look, we can have access to these regardless of if the internet's up or down. So the other thing I said I'd talk about today that I always like to do with our clients is highlight some of the limitations and challenges. So again, I'm not a salesperson from Microsoft. I am someone who implements SharePoint on a regular basis and who gets the calls if something goes wrong. So we try to make sure that SharePoint is the right solution for the clients we implement it for, and that they implement it in the right way so that they know what they're getting into and they know what they're using and they know it's suitable. So as I said, SharePoint is not suitable for every organisation, and often it comes down to maturity and ready for change, because it is a different user experience than a file server. Now some people have tried to and have succeeded essentially try and replicate a file server and put it on SharePoint and almost don't tell their staff that things have changed. Now that's usually not an approach we recommend, because using an online SharePoint intranet for your document management is quite different from using a file server. So they both have their purposes and they're both good at certain things. And some organisations, let's say you've got 100 staff all working from the one office, you never travel, all they need to access is that, you've got a lot of files, then look, a file server is perfectly fine. And in some cases, better than SharePoint. Whereas if you've got a more diverse organisation that travels around a lot, always has access to the internet, then SharePoint is probably a better solution because you can access from a range of locations without having to worry about the access into a file server using VPNs, and accessing file servers from remote locations can be difficult. So that's why a lot of organisations look to move to SharePoint. As I mentioned before, there is a sync tool for that offline copy that can have errors and it needs to be managed. So if you have errors and you leave them for 6 months, that's going to cause issues for other users. Now the sync tool is only applicable to people who want their documents offline or available with Windows Explorer. So in many cases, we actually recommend that people just use the web browser. You don't even need to worry about syncing. So just log it like you would in a website or an intranet, just access the documents from there. So you don't actually need to have offline files if you don't want to. Because one of the issues that some organisations have is they have lots of documents all in the same categories. So you actually have a limit of 5,000 files per library. Now, to be honest, you can have as many libraries as you want, but if you put more than 5,000 files in one library, things will start breaking. So the sync will have issues, permissions can have issues. So if you try and dump everything from a file server in one library, then that can cause some issues. So usually part of our process is that we look at how many different libraries you use and splitting your information up into different categories. And we'll talk about that later. The other common issue that we see is some organisations name their files really badly and they have more than 250 characters for a file name. So, if you have 10 layers of folders and your file name includes a lot of information, then you're probably going to go over 250 characters, which again can cause issues when it's in SharePoint. So that's something to consider. The other storage limit is every organisation gets a terabyte of storage per SharePoint tenant, so per Office 365. Plus, you get half a gig per user, so 500 meg. So you can, depending on how many, obviously, staff you have or users you have, then that will grow exponentially. Up to 25 terabytes is the maximum you can have. If you need more than the 1 terabyte and the 0.5 gig per user, you can buy more storage from Microsoft at a reasonably good price. So storage can be a limitation, but to be honest, if you've got 25 terabytes of documents, then there's probably you probably need some other system, client information system or other system. Doing the back end of SharePoint can require someone that knows what they're doing or an administrator that you can train up. So it's not the most user-friendly sort of experience if you're going to do a lot of heavy editing of the SharePoint sites. Now, from a user perspective, they wouldn't be doing a lot of editing. It's more just having an administrator in your organisation that can make some of those common changes. Most users may require some training for doing more of that complex document management or using lists. So if you want users to use version history and co-authoring and fill out forms and access workflows and do some more of that complex stuff, then training is required. However, if all they're doing is logging onto an intranet home screen and downloading a document, they probably don't need training. So they're the key some of the key limitations. Now, migration is a consideration. So you obviously need to get all of your documents from wherever they are now into SharePoint. And you need to manage the permissions carefully to make sure that, let's say the board site, you need to make sure that the board site is restricted just to the board if that's how you want it. So these 10 things are just some of the things that we see when we're implementing that I would like you all to think about before you just go off and start using SharePoint. So if none of these, if you say, no, our file names aren't over 250, we've only got 2,000 files, we don't have that much storage, we've got someone who can edit, migration will be easy, then yes, SharePoint's probably for you. But if any of these raise some questions, then it's worth sort of fleshing them out a bit more. The other thing that is a consideration, and what we always do is, okay, well, let's look at what you're trying to achieve and then work out whether SharePoint is actually the best tool. Now, Office 365 has a heap of tools now and a heap of different applications that you all have access to. Most of these are for free, and in some cases, better suited to your purpose than SharePoint. So I rolled out Office 365 to a small childcare organisation recently, really just one site, 30 staff. We didn't need SharePoint. All we needed was 2 Office 365 groups where we had one document library in each group. They had a notebook, a distribution list, an email, and that's all they needed. They didn't need lists and a whole intranet and multiple sites. They just needed one spot to store for their board, policies and procedures, for their staff, meeting minutes and general documents and work instructions. So in that case, that was actually, they didn't need SharePoint. Other organisations who are really just wanting that discussion board, sort of the Facebook for Business style platform, where they're not storing any documents, all they're doing is discussing and talking, then often we just roll out Yammer, which is actually a bit simpler to implement than SharePoint. So that can work as well. Again, Yammer's not as good as document management or forms, but it can be good just for discussion. Now I won't run through all these, but so you can book calendars and resources and rooms and share calendars through Exchange in your email. So those people looking at setting up shared calendars in SharePoint, to be honest, you already have shared calendars in your email exchange. So again, have a look at that. Office 365 groups can be used for the intranet, for a document collaboration for boards as well. Power BI can be used for business intelligence and reporting. Those individuals documents that I mentioned a minute ago for OneDrive for Business, you can actually, many organisations actually just use OneDrive for Business for a lot of their document management. Power Apps is a new tool through Microsoft that's doing forms. Planner can do project management. Delve helps you search your colleagues' documents and information. Office 365 Video for videos. Skype for Business for instant messaging. And in many cases, you may still need a server or a network attached storage drive. So again, these are some alternatives to SharePoint or complementary systems to SharePoint. So many organisations have these and SharePoint. So what I might do, Sean, I might pause for questions. We'll have some questions at the end as well. But after this, I'll go into a bit more implementation discussion.
Yeah, certainly, not a problem, Matt. So we do have one question that's come through from Mitzi, who's asking, on SharePoint, can you create a subsite where you share information externally to a group of people, say in the case of committees or sharing to a board?
Yes, you can. So you can, and I've mentioned that there, you can do sharing. Now, one caveat to the sharing is Microsoft require you to, the person you're sharing with, to have a Microsoft account. So that could just be their personal Hotmail or their Outlook.com account or anything like that. So you can set up a site, or to be honest, often when we do external sharing, we set up a separate site collection, which is what we do for our clients and partners, and then share that with their Microsoft account. Now, for boards, often for boards, you would actually give your board an email account. So our board, I believe, have at infoexchange.org accounts, so they can log in. So they can be treated as essentially internal users with their own site. But if you want to share it externally, they just need a Microsoft account.
Perfect, thanks Matt. It looks as though that might be all the questions for now, so happy to move on with the content if you are.
Yeah, sure. So I'll save maybe 5 minutes at the end for some more questions, and I'm happy to go over time and hang around for a little bit longer, or as I've said, you can contact me directly. So this next bit is more around the implementation and some questions for you to ask yourself when you're thinking of whether SharePoint is right for you. So this again comes back to, what are you actually going to use it for, and do you need it? So, and is it the best tool to solve your problem? So I think working out your requirements and then trying to match that with the functionality in SharePoint is the first important step. So we have some organisations that come to us and say, look, I need a spot where I'm going to store all my information about all my clients, and I want to track some of that communication with my clients. And then we sort of say, well, have you looked into a CRM? Because again, that's the whole purpose of a CRM, is that client information system. We have others who want to do some more sharing information externally. So some people use their website for that. So it's really about what is the purpose of a SharePoint intranet for your organisation, and are you ready to change? So we have other organisations that come to us and say, oh look, we've got this file server, but I'm thinking of getting rid of it. And then when we actually speak to the staff, in some organisations, they're just not ready to move off their current file server. Their content's a mess, they don't want to fix it up, they just want to move it to another platform, and often that's a recipe for disaster. So sometimes that's a consideration as well. So really the first step for you from an implementation point of view is to answer some of these questions. So who's going to be using it, as per the last question? Is it external or internal? Is it staff, volunteers? Some people just have these platforms for management. Others have everyone, including service delivery, using it. The most important question is, why do people go there? It's really easy, to set up a new intranet and go, okay, great, here it is. If we build it, they will come. But if they don't have a reason to go there, it's not really going to get adopted and used. So they need some motivation or some relevance to make sure it's suitable for them. And where else do they go? So you don't want to create an additional spot for, if they already have to go to the file server for this, go to the CRM for that, go to the website for that. Just giving them an extra spot to go to is, again, not really efficient. So what you're looking to do is consolidate some of those and try and give them a purpose for each application. And when will they log in? So again, we work with childcare, we work with disability services, we work with a range of people who actually don't have access to PCs during their shift. So a lot of them are actually either using mobile devices, or they're doing it when they finish their shift and spend 10 minutes in the office, or they're doing it from home. So that impacts how you set it up. And how open are you being with your information? So do you actually, is it a platform for everyone to input information and edit information? Or is it more a top-down intranet where you're saying, here's our management information and everyone just logs in and downloads it. So again, two different approaches. And are they comfortable using it? Now again, so that determines how much training you'll need to make people comfortable going to an intranet. And with any IT project or any project, you need to have some KPIs or some measurement of success. So maybe your measurement of success is, okay, we're going to reduce paper and manual forms over the next 6 months by moving these 10 administration processes onto SharePoint. Or we just want to share news from the CEO, so we want 80% of our staff to log in the first month. So again, just giving yourself some tangible KPIs. So how will you do it? So if, let's say you have chosen to implement SharePoint and you've got the right reasons for doing it, how are you going to do it? So we'll give you some ideas here. Do you have the capacity internally? Do you have someone who can pick this up and learn it? Or do you need to get an external? And who will manage it on an ongoing basis? And who will decide what content should go up there? To be honest, it's easy to get a technical person or a third party to come in and build a SharePoint site for you. But if you don't have someone internal that can say, okay, this is the information we need on our intranet and I'll help you upload it, then it's just going to sit there empty. So that's almost a more important step. So if you are going to implement SharePoint, these are some stages that we typically recommend considering. So often finding a partner or a champion first is the most important step, because they will drive the other 9 steps. So picking someone that can lead it both internally and technically. Now it could be 2 people, it could be an internal champion with a partner, with support, or a volunteer, could be anyone. So that's the first step. Then really their first job is building a business case and getting approval. Now the business case is for management to, I suppose, justify any expense or effort, but it's also to staff. So it's also saying, hey, we're doing this project and this is why we're doing it and this is how it's going to benefit you. The third stage is review and scoping. So working out, okay, what are we going to use it for? Is it going to be a full-blown intranet and everyone's going to store every document in the organization on this and we're going to use it for every project? Or, hey, let's just start with a high-level intranet that we can store some policies and procedures on. So that's really the first key area to do it, and you can obviously stage this process as well. Review the content and plan the migration. So again, if you're trying to move your file server onto SharePoint, you really need to have a good look at your content and work out how to bring that across. And then it's designing your SharePoint site and information architecture, which is what libraries do each documents live in, what content comes across, what are our naming protocols, what are our permissions, and then the build. So you see there's 5 stages before you even get to actually looking or touching SharePoint. And this is often what can cause issues for people. Some people just go in and build it without having done those first 5 stages. So that's really one of the most important things to remember. The build, to be honest, is reasonably easy and reasonably, for most cases, reasonably basic. So a lot of our time that when we do a SharePoint project with clients, the build is probably less than 20% of the time. 80% of the time is thinking through all those other aspects and doing content migrations and training and scoping. So just keep that in mind when you're asking for technical help. Really what you need help with is all 10 stages, not just stage 6. Then it's training the admins and the champions. So often, again, what we do for many organizations is we do a bit of training for a group of people, and then they're the ones that actually go out and do user training. So don't feel you need to have an external come in and do all these whiz-bang training sessions. we've found that the best training is actually when an internal person can sit with someone or a small group of people and actually say, okay, show me how you work and I'll show you how you can now do that on SharePoint. We always recommend a pilot and testing process, obviously content migration, and that's different depending on what you're doing. In some cases you may need a third-party tool to make that easier if you're doing a lot of content. And then launch and training. The other key thing to remember is have resourcing the ongoing evaluation and management of this. So don't just launch it and then go, I'm never looking at it again. Having that regular process. So I touched on information architecture before, but when you're looking at developing a SharePoint site, you need to consider how to set it up and how to structure it. And really it's how to decide this is based on content, based on permissions, and based on who needs that information. So some of your staff will only need to go to the home site. Some of them will spend all their time in their team site. So having a look at that process, again, is one of the things that we spend most of our time on, is how to set it up so that it makes sense to you and your staff. The other thing to think about is who can access what documents. Now, some of this can be drawn from your current file server to say, okay, what are we doing now? And then let's bring that across. Or this is your chance to actually start fresh and decide what level of access everyone needs. One of the most important things is change management. So again, I've touched on some of these already, but engaging management, create some hype. We have often, many of the organisations we work with, we recommend that they give it a name and give it a brand and give it a logo and talk about it in a third-party sense and really create some excitement about it. Put some posters up in your office and then do a staged approach. And where needed for your staff, training and documentation, obviously. Now, in some organisations you don't need that, but it's always worth exploring. And really having that regular staff meeting or internal communications to continually promote the use of a new intranet. All right, so we're running out of time, so I've got 10 top tips and then I'll open it up for questions. So really making sure that it's relevant and you're explaining the benefits of it to staff. So again, if they don't have a reason to go there, it's not going to work. We often recommend that people just try and use the online portal through a web browser as much as possible without relying on the sync tool. Using those external portals for project management with the board and using those lists and forms for collecting information. I would consider metadata. Now, it's not for everyone. Again, it's not for every purpose, but I would trial it with maybe a policy library or something like that where you can look at that categorization instead of having lots of folders. In most cases, it does help to get a third-party expert to help make the success. So someone who's done SharePoint before, preferably SharePoint Online before, and then they can help on an ongoing basis. Look at using this as an excuse to change the way that you work. Most people have a really messy file server, and the file names are awful, they've got too many folders, permissions are a mess. So this is your chance to actually start fresh and come up with new protocols, stop using folders, as many folders, you know, look at your permissions. And maybe you don't need half of the documents you're actually sort of saving, so have a look at that. Don't automatically assume that SharePoint can do everything for you, so consider some of that local storage. To be honest, if you're uploading videos and editing videos in large files, they're going to use your bandwidth. So in some cases, it makes more sense to have them locally. Number 9 there, complement SharePoint with other applications. Don't try and necessarily do everything in one platform. Pick the best of each platform as we said in that previous slide. And final tip, make sure each function has a clear purpose and it adds value. So don't just do it for the sake of it because it's a fun, great new tool that Microsoft have launched. Do it because it's going to add some value to your organisation. All right, so some additional support. We actually have do-it-yourself workshops if you want to have a go at this yourself. There is one next month actually. So anyone who wants help with this, myself and a colleague will run you through a workshop so that you can do your own SharePoint and you don't need to pay thousands of dollars for someone to help. Readiness assessments will give you a sense of how to move to Office 365 and what's involved. Alternatively, we can help with some implementation or configuration and development as well. But if you're ready to go, jump on the Microsoft site and set up a 30-day trial. So my phone number and email address are there. Feel free to contact me anytime with any further questions. And Sean, I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Matt. So we've got a question from Belinda who asks, is it possible to create a shared calendar that all staff can log on and view, as well as add events to and separate standalone, to add events to. And as an example, for example, going through the Google Calendars you can share with others. Is there something similar that you can do in SharePoint Online?
Sean, the last bit of your question broke up, but I think I got it. Basically, yes, you can do shared calendars. You can set up a central calendar for events. I think you may have seen it on a couple of the intranets, had calendars on the home page, so that you can do it for the whole organisation or you can do it for particular projects. The one thing I would say to consider is if you're already using Office 365 for email, in most cases you already have shared calendars across your organisation, so try not to replicate that. So for us, our boardroom already has a calendar, so I can see what's happening in the boardroom. I can see my colleagues' calendars. So if it's just sharing between a few people in your team, then probably the Exchange email calendars could work for you, or booking rooms. But as you said, if it's a large, you want an event calendar for your organisation, a SharePoint calendar will work really well.
Great, thanks Matt. Our next question is from Rachel who asks, are you able to explain further the term metadata and why it should be applied?
Yeah, so metadata is look, it's a complex topic, but essentially when you save a document in a folder, let's say you've got a HR policy, let's say you've got a child protection policy, and this is a real example from an organisation. Many people want to store a child protection policy in a policies folder, right? But then you've got someone from the risk management area also wanting to store that child protection policy in their risk folder. And you've got the program people from the children's services wanting to store that child protection policy in the children's folder. So what ends up happening is you're creating, because one folder can't cater for everyone, you're creating 3 different versions of that. What metadata does, you can attach any description or category to an individual file. Now this could be an image, could be a document, any type of information. So essentially you've got a child protection policy. When you upload that, you can tag it, say, okay, this is a policy. So anyone can then filter and say, show me all the policies, and all the policies will come up. But also, if the risk management, if you want to tag it to risk management and say, this thing's about child protection, and someone else is searching to say, show me every document to do with child protection, that document has been categorized with risk management, so that appears as well. And likewise, if the children's services people want to access that document, you would tag it to relevant to children's services, so that when the children's services search for all of their documents, it would be included in that. So essentially it's a little, think of it as a tag or a field, attached to that document or image. Likewise, in an image gallery, I've done these with image galleries where you upload an image and it might be a picture of a kid at a childcare centre playing in the sandpit on a sunny day. So when you're going to search for images, when you want to put something on the website, you don't want to have to sift through every file or even just look at file names. You want to say, okay, put some filters on. Show me an image on a sunny day. Show me an image of, you know, a portrait file. Show me an image in a sandpit. You know, and you're picking categories, and then it gradually filters down. So I'm sorry if that rambled a little bit, but it is a bit of a complex topic, but it's something that is worth exploring. And to be honest, we could probably do another separate webinar on that. It's not suitable for everyone. If your staff love using folders and have hundreds of folders, they probably need to start using metadata, but I wouldn't automatically just make everyone use metadata for everything, because it can be difficult from a change management perspective. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Matt. Our next question is from Tom, who says, we have multiple sites and currently use a file server to store reports. Can we use SharePoint for generating online forms that staff can fill in without accessing the file server? Also, can SharePoint generate a report, for example, incident report, of all of the incidents submitted via SharePoint?
So yes, is the short answer, Tom. And I have done this exact scenario with a large organisation across 700 locations across the country. Essentially, you have an intranet with an incident reporting list and a form that inputs into that. Or now you could even do a power, if they've got mobile devices, you could do power apps where they fill out the incident, all the information about that incident, and when they click submit, it basically goes into a list, an incident reporting database, if you will. And that sits on SharePoint. Now you, as a manager or an OH&S manager, can access all that information in that list. You can also get workflows or notifications when someone logs an incident. So we actually used to have different workflows to say, okay, if this is an incident that's related to a staff member, then we need to tell the HR department because they need to know about the work cover claim that could happen. Or if this is an incident that may deal with insurance, then you need to notify the insurance company, etc. The other thing that you can also do is reporting out of lists. So this is where something like Power BI comes in, or dashboards, and you can actually pull data from a SharePoint list and display it in a nice way. So you could categorize your incidents, for example, if they've inputted what type of incident it is, where the location is, whatever fields that you put in your incident report, then you can show that to your managers and say, show me all the incidents from this location, or show me all the incidents that were from a manual handling issue, or etc. So you can present that back in reports.
Great, thank you, Matt. We've got, it looks as though, one more question from Ben, just asking, does everyone need to be tenants? He uses the word tenants, but saying basically, does each user on SharePoint need their own license? Basically, yes, except for external users. So if you've got a staff of 100 people, then if you want them to log into that site, then and edit and even read, then they will need a SharePoint license or an Office 365 license. Now, as we said right at the start, if you're an eligible not-for-profit, you actually get these licenses for free. So that's great news. The other thing you can do external sharing. So for those people, like if people don't have a license or an email address within your organization, then you could just do some external sharing, but each of those users, however, you could set them up with Outlook.com accounts or a free Microsoft account that they could use to log in, or they could use their own personal Hotmail or whatever it may be. So
Yes and no. External users don't need a license, but internal users do.
Great, thank you, Matt. Our next question is from Ali, who asks, how can you go about implementing workflow in SharePoint? Do they need to obtain a third-party software? In the case of, for example, they have many employee HR forms. In fact, they've got quite a lot of forms, like 50 different types of forms, and like to be able to automate them.
Sean, that broke up a little bit towards the end as well, but I think I got the gist of it. Basically, there is inbuilt functionality in SharePoint, and SharePoint is a product that you get free as well, that you can implement workflows, and you can use info paths for forms as well. I think what could be driving this question is there are also third-party tools. So I have used several third-party tools in the past that have some additional functionality and can work better. So I know the example of a product that is reasonably expensive but has some good functionality for workflows and forms and makes it a bit easier to use. But you can do a lot of that free with the inbuilt SharePoint, just standard tools in SharePoint Designer.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. And it looks as though we've got one final question that's come through from Karen. And Karen says, I am a user with 365 already, but I don't have administrator rights. Can I set up a distribution list which I can share with other users without those admin rights?
Yes, so distribution lists are separate to SharePoint, for example. One of the things that you could do, and we touched on this before, is Office 365 groups can be created by any user within Office 365. So you could create a group for that, for the members, for the distribution group, and that essentially gives you an email address for that group and a distribution group. So you would create a group called Board, you would add the members on who are the board members, and in that group you get an email box, you get a news feed for any emails that come through, you get a document library, you get a planner. So maybe Office 365 groups could work for that. Alternatively, each user within Outlook and Exchange can create a normal distribution group for themselves, but not typically a global one. So it wasn't really a SharePoint question, but these things do flow into each other and use for part of your communication. Alternatively, instead of a distribution group where you're emailing around information, why don't you think about a SharePoint site for that team where you can just post the information on the site and store that all there instead of emailing everyone around and emailing around your content. And on your newsfeed, people can reply to comments, and you can actually use that as an information portal as opposed to just emailing around.
Great. Thank you, Matt. And it looks as though we have reached the end of our questions for today. So before closing off, is there anything more that you would like to add?
No, except for, yeah, feel free to contact us if you have any further questions or if you need help with anything. But in general, good luck. SharePoint is a great product. It's free. Microsoft are continuing to develop it and add more functionality. It's not perfect, it doesn't do everything, and it's not suitable for everyone, but I would urge you to consider it and look at it as part of the Office 365 package that we recommend for most not-for-profits nowadays. So good luck.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt. Thanks obviously for presenting today, and thank you everyone for joining as well. If you do have any further questions from today's webinar, you can contact Matt via his email address at mmoulton@idfoexchange.org, or you can always send the questions through to events@connectingup.org and we can pass them on. Don't forget, a copy of the presentation will be sent to you all in the coming days, so please keep a lookout in your inboxes. And that's all from me, so enjoy the rest of your evening.